Howdy again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher, and this is tips number 537, which is part 8 of the Mead band sander restoration. And there'll be one more part after this, and then we're going to call it quits, so it makes quite a long series, 9 parts in all, I finally have determined. But, well, in the last episode I made the swing arm here, the idler arm, whatever you want to call it, got it pretty well assembled, so the thing really is done and ready to use, except it lacks guard. So I want to make a guard both for the top wheel and one for the V-belt. So let's get started with that. Well, on a little machine like this, you really just can't guard every moving part. There's too many of them. But we certainly want a guard around the V-belt. That'll take your finger right off. And I've seen men with missing fingers because of belts and pulleys. By the way, thanks for watching my videos, and watch my 1,000 other shop videos, if you will. So on this side, you know, there's going to be some danger. I'm not going to even try to guard this down here. And this is the working area, so how are you going to guard that? But one place that needs a guard is right up here at the top. So let me show you what Mead and bell saw did with that. Remember, bell saw is the same as Mead. And I believe that Mead made them for bell saw. By the way, all the paperwork I've been showing you came from Keith Rucker's Vintage Machinery, so you can look that up under Mead and under bell saw, and you can go ahead and print that out should you have a desire. But looking at this particular one from 1956, you can see that there's a little guard right over here, but it's not really a protective guard. I think more than anything it's just for appearance. And there was a decal on it. I'm not sure if it was a warning or maybe just their trademark, but they certainly had their trademark here too, and that's why I saved that and did not paint over it. I rather like that. And in looking at this page from bell saw, you can also see the cover right over the front here. So let's talk about that. And there it is in the bell saw parts list, and I do remember that from the one that I had at the high school, because you had to remove that to get at some of the tracking mechanism. Remember, these are the 2 tracking screws, and the third one here, and it's a tapped hole, was meant for the little guard, and again, that was missing when I bought this. So I did make up a little guard here, and this is made out of aluminum, rather crude, several bends on it, and it goes in position right like this. And as I said, I don't believe this is for safety at all. This had to be notched out here for this adjustment screw. So you still can make your tracking adjustments with this guard in place, but maybe it was just a finishing touch and a place to put the trademark. But to make something like that, I generally start out with a piece of, well, this is just index card. And usually make 2 or 3 until I get it just the way I want it. And then as an afterthought, you can see here I had to notch out that corner. So that's what that looks like, and the screw will hold it in place. Well, looking at my Kalamazoo 2x48 that I made in the last series, you can see that I have a guard over the top wheel. Remember that Mead sander was designed and built in the late 50s, long before OSHA, and where it was every man for himself. So I think you can imagine that we need some kind of guard over the top wheel, because there are some sparks and particles that seem to follow the belt and just wrap right around and can throw it right in your face, because this is pretty much at eye level. So we need a guard around here. So how to make that? Well, I was perusing the literature here for the bell saw and realized that at some point, and this probably was from the 60s or 70s, I'm not really sure when this was all done up, but you can see that they had an optional belt guard mounted right here on the grinder, but it was in addition to this little front guard. So it was a separate piece. And I thought, well, that's pretty good, that's how I'll make it. But wait, why don't I make all of this in one piece, even though I'm making it hard on myself? Well, let me backtrack. Initially I was going to make it 2 pieces, so I came up with this design strictly in paper. That would go on like that, and little bracket, and then the actual wraparound guard would be a separate piece. Let's see what that looks like. So this is what it looks like in paper with the guard around there, around the wheel. And if I can tilt it a little bit, of course this isn't shaped right, but that's the general principle. And I like to work with paper or construction paper or something like that. Saves you making so many out of actual metal. Well then, taking a used envelope from the post office, that's rather nice paper to work with. There it is, all in one piece. Really not much different than the last one I showed you. And again, I made it difficult on myself because there's a lot of waste stock, and I'm going to make this out of sheet aluminum. And it's a rather difficult bend because we got 1, 2, 3, 4 different bends plus the curve. Well, here's the finished product, and it's aluminum 50 thousandths thick, whatever gauge that is. It's just whatever I had laying around here. All one piece. And it goes on like this, and a single screw holding it in place. Not bad design, do you think? So that's what it looks like. Notice it wraps a little bit farther here than what it does over there. And I had just a little issue with clearance right here where my pencil is poking. So I had to notch it just a little bit. But no problem. I think that pretty well protects it. Alright, enough on that. Well, if you look at the original paperwork here, you can see that bell saw had no provision for a guard over the belt. But in fact, as I remember, Mead didn't even sell this ready to use. You had to mount it and you had to provide your own motor and belt and all of that. So naturally they didn't have a guard, and that goes back to the days before we used guards on everything. But if you look at the little bit more modern bell saw one, they have no belt guard either in any of their pictures or in any of their parts list. So, and I owned one. I did have one, and it did not have a belt guard on it. And even at that time, and that's about 15 years ago, I didn't like that, and I thought that's kind of dangerous. This is the Delta Rockwell parts list for their 1-inch sander, and you can see that they had a belt guard, and it consisted of several pieces, so there it is. Now I'm not going to make one that complicated because there's just a lot of bends on there. Remember, I do not own a bending brake, so everything that I do has to be done by hand. Alright, this is what the bell saw looked like that I had. And I didn't like the stand at all, although it was sturdy enough. That was all stamped sheet metal, and I think it was designed so that it could be knocked down and shipped in a small box. But the way the legs splayed out, I was constantly tripping over the thing, so I just didn't like it at all. And notice that there's no belt guard, and the motor hung off the back, and I thought a rather flimsy bracket, and it just bounced and shook, and you know, it was kind of a nightmare. I did not like it at all. And there's another picture, and you can see that there is no belt guard on the bell saw. And you had to reach way back there for the switch, which I thought was a little awkward, but at least it had a switch. I won't show every step of the design here, but I would like to make basically just a box that would be about that long and that high. Probably make a bend so it would mount directly to the board, similar to the way this is mounted. But since this will be made out of aluminum and rather flimsy, I may put a stud right into here with a thread and a nut and everything to make it sturdy. We'll see how much it vibrates and shakes. But let me go ahead and you see, we got about 13 inches between center, but I want to make the guard, I would say, 16 inches long and 4.5, yeah, about 4.5 inches high. So let me rough cut one out of construction paper, which I have stolen from my wife, and I think it's left over from when she was an Awana leader. Do you people remember Awana Club in many churches? And that stood for Approved Workmen Are Not Ashamed. Okay, here it is. That took about 10 minutes. Some changes I've noticed already. I will notch that out so that it will clear the base down here. And this is a little too wide, so I'll change that to 1.5. And this too wide, I'll change it from 1 inch to 3/4. But it looks like it'll fit pretty well. Again, it's just nothing more than a box. Now, without a box and pan brake, these are kind of difficult bends to make by hand, so I'm going to score them real well, maybe even on the milling machine, to see if I can hand bend them with a fairly decent bend. Now, I have avoided making tabs here. Maybe I will, and if it doesn't work out, I'll cut them off, but I really like a tab on there that can be pop riveted. If it was steel, I would spot weld it, because I do have a spot welder. But I'm going to use aluminum simply because it's what I've got. And if you look over here, there it is. And I don't know who the heck Mark E. Lang is, because that's just a piece of scrap that came from an auction, but that's what I'll use. It's textured. There's the layout. Now I will cut this out on the bandsaw simply because I do not have a big wide shear. This is how I'm scoring the aluminum prior to bending. That's a 90-degree tool. And I'm just going in about 20 thousandths, essentially to relieve it and to make it easier to bend. Well, I have scored it. Now the question is, will the metal tear or break as I make the bends? So I don't know. I've done this once before and it seemed to work, but aluminum is pretty soft, so I will make these long bends first. Notice that this one is scored on the backside. Couple things yet. I will put a rivet in each end, probably not even a need. Now the reason for this isn't because I mismeasured, it's because the overall length of this piece was a little bit shy of what I needed, so I had to cheat on that and shorten these ends just a little bit. That gave me the length that I needed. I probably should have trimmed this so it would be equal. And then this is notched here for this screw and the thickness of the base right here. All right, just a little more fitting. Let me put those rivets in. Pop rivets. I'm going to reverse this pulley if I can, so the set screw's on the inside. It gives me a little bit more room right here. Like that. Although now the shaft is protruding a little, I may have to drill a hole in the guard and let just a little bit of the shaft stick out, which would in no way endanger anyone. Alright, I opened up a hole there. I used one of these Stepbets, Christmas tree bits, I call them. One of the handiest cutting tools ever devised by man, and for many years I thought they were a novelty tool because they were sold with some of the cheap tools years ago. Now this is a quality bit here, $20 one or so, but these really are handy. Do a nice clean hole. Now what I've been doing here is fitting, notching and making other little minor corrections that are required for it to fit. And that is what always happens when you're working without a drawing and working by the seat of your pants and baguettes and bagosh. But I have no objection to that. Now I need some holes here, probably 3, and use some sheet metal screws to fasten this onto the wooden base. Have not determined if I need some other fastener up here to keep it from thwapping around. Well, speaking of fitting, you know, there's a trade called diesel fitter. Well, that reminds me of a story. I was in the Salvation Army store, and a guy was shopping for his wife, used clothing, because they didn't have much money. And the clerk came up and said, can I help you? And he said, well, yeah. So they started laying some clothes out on the table, and he said, diesel fitter and diesel fitter and diesel fitter. I'll take them. May I make a humble suggestion? Buy yourself 3 or 4 of these. I think I have 5. That way you can keep different size punches and dies in each one, because it's a half-hour job to change these punches and dies, and I myself would rather take a severe beating with a bamboo cane than change the punches. Now the same thing goes for pop rivet guns. Make sure you have those at least in 2 different sizes. It'll save a lot of anger and frustration and temper tantrums. 68 cents for a pack of screws from Kmart. Boy, Kmart's out of business, and so are those prices. Okay, I think it's looking pretty good. Now, just a little bit of movement there. Probably could benefit by a screw going through here and into this, a shoulder bolt type of screw. Notice the hole here. But let me turn it on and see if it rattles. See, there's no rattle at all from this. You see, there aren't any rattles. I don't see any vibration either, which kind of surprised me. If it does vibrate at some time, I'll go ahead and put another screw in there, but I don't think that's necessary. It's pretty firmly held by 2 screws into the base. And you know what? You couldn't get your finger caught in that belt if you tried. I suppose if you went back here. But looks pretty good. Should it be painted yellow? I don't know. I think I'm done. So between this guard and the guard up here, that concludes this video, this part of the video series, which is part 8. Now there is going to be a part 9, so be sure and watch that, where I show you how to use this and to finalize a few things concerning this build. See you then in the next part. This is Tubalcain saying so long for now.